Okay.
We are live.
We
Hello.
are live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers.
And then Caitlin Miller.
The two of us are both licensed therapists, but this is not therapy for
Never.
Very emphatic and very true. This is not therapy for very, very many reasons. What this is just an open conversation. We're here and available for this time every week to talk about whatever you all want to talk about. So those of you who are here, thank you for being here with us. We like it even more if you are, if you write messages to us in the chat.
Absolutely.
If we don't have specific information from you about what you're interested in, or then we just kind of do our best to make guesses and have conversations that we find interesting and hopefully relevant. We work for a therapeutic and executive functioning coaching practice called Effective Artistry, based in Northbrook, Illinois. For therapy, we do individual, couples, family, and group therapy. Well, I guess I say
Developing groups.
Yeah, we don't currently run a group.
Yeah.
And for therapy, we can only work with individuals in the state of Illinois. We also have a couple coaches. Maria Moran, who is typically hosting this, is one of our executive functioning coaches that we work with, and they can work with people all over the world. Marie, I think will be here today. I'm not sure. I sent her the invite fairly late, so hopefully and maybe she'll be joining at some point. But if not, it'll be the two of us. Just to throw out there, I did a presentation last week where many people were asking about, follow-up questions and whatever. And as I always do, I put this stream out to people. So if any of you are here from that and have follow-up questions or anything, then please just let us know in the chat there. I think that's more or less.
Yeah, I think that's everything.
Okay. Just be aware this isn't anonymous. It's a live stream. People are, the same way that you could be watching this, anybody else could be watching this. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, and we also stream on different platforms too. So if you don't see other comments or whatever,
Yeah,
do they all see each other's comments? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think if you're on Twitch, you see the Twitch comments and YouTube, etc. Yeah.
How are you, Brandon?
I'm well. Thank you. I'm well. How are you?
I'm sleepy, but excited to be here.
Good. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's always fun.
I started eating crumpets again from Trader Joe's, and they're so exciting.
What are crumpets?
They kind of taste like a cross between a pancake and an English muffin.
Interesting.
And if you warm them up and you put either butter or jam or a compote or jelly.
Do you warm them up like in the toaster?
Yeah, toaster oven. Yeah.
So they're more akin to like the English muffin side of things.
I don't know. They're right in the middle.
You don't put pancakes in a toaster. You make them in a pan. It was actually
It's a cake in a pan?
It was relatively recently that I put that together. Like, it's like if you were to make a cake, but in a pan as opposed to a baking dish, so it has no like height to the sides, it just spreads out.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's called pancake.
It's not the same ingredients though as a cake. I don't think there's any baking soda or baking powder. And not so different.
Because you're making it in a pan instead of in an oven. I don't know a lot about baking, but wouldn't baking soda and whatever be about something that gets baked and like rises in an oven as opposed to something that's being baked with the heat coming from one side?
Probably, yeah.
Now I want to know.
I could ask my grandmother.
Anyway, that is one of my favorite things is when I'll hear a word that I've heard a million times before and for the first time actually think about it in a more deep way and be like, oh, interesting, make connections or come to questions about why is that? Like, why does that word mean that thing?
Yeah, that's kind of your job. Or at least the way you interpret your job.
I mean, it's a lot of what I do for sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what's been on your mind?
Sherlock Holmes. I don't really know what that reference means, just to be clear.
Trying to figure things out, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I do quote Sherlock Holmes every once in a while. In fact,
I think you might have done that last week.
In the presentation I gave last week, I quoted it. The only quote I ever do is once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true. Which I'm not actually sure if that's the direct quote, but.
Mm-hmm. What was your presentation about?
Neurodiversity in the classroom. I was speaking to. I'm going to talk to the camera because you already know this, so I think you were just asking.
No, I actually don't.
Oh.
Yeah. I just knew you had a presentation and I was excited for you.
I was talking to an organization that, among other things, supports parents who volunteer in their children's schools. They don't.
Oh, nice.
They don't work in their children's classrooms, but in other classrooms in their children's schools. So it's
interesting. Yeah.
An organization, Palenques. Well, now I want to make. I think that's to my recollection, that's the name. They're very big on like community organization and community power and connection, and I love all of that. And volunteering to be in the schools is one of the ways that they, support developing the community, right?
That's super cool.
Yeah, they do these things every Wednesday. They do like development, kind of like professional development, except not for your profession because they're volunteers. Mm-hmm. And so I was talking to them about neurodiversity specifically. Mm-hmm. It was fun. Did 2 sessions. Really cool organization. Mm-hmm. There were, 1,400 people or so, split over 2 sessions. Live translation into. So I presented in English, and it was translated live into Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, very cool. So yeah, we were talking about neurodiversity in the classroom, although, as you might guess, my presentation style, I encourage interactivity, mm-hmm. making it a conversation as much as possible. So every presentation is different, and mm-hmm. we were talking about whatever people were bringing up, same as we do here. But yeah, it was fun. It went well.
When you do a presentation, do you make like slides or?
I do, mostly just because people request them.
Okay.
And I do use them again because it's what people expect, and mm-hmm. but I tend not to put a ton of information in my slides. Mm-hmm. My slides are 2 things. Either it's just to help me like organize and remember what I was going to talk about. So I have a lot of slides that literally just say a word like attention or whatever to remember that that's
cool.
When I'm going to talk about attention. Or somewhere I'll have more detailed information because that's just like if it comes up and if we're talking about it, I can skip to that slide. Mm-hmm. But mostly what happens when I give presentations is I'll kind of talk about how we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. As we do at the beginning of this, right? Like, I believe it is generally a useful, helpful thing to spend time at the beginning of some endeavor to give everyone expectations about how it's going to go, especially any ways in which it's going to go differently than similar things typically go. And then I'll usually have some kind of like, there will be something I'm going to present, usually language and how we use language. So like in this case, I talked about neurodiversity and neurodivergence for maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes at most. Mm-hmm. And then I'll ask if there are any questions or comments. And then usually that's the rest of it is people bring things up and I am either answering or responding and making connections to things. And then I'll jump to a slide. Someone will ask, what do I do if such and such? And in answering that question, I'll give a suggestion or recommend a particular framework or whatever, and I'll go to the slide that talks about that framework. And I'm trying to always answer questions. One of my rules is, I've said on the stream a bunch, general questions get general answers and specific questions get specific answers. Mm-hmm. But when I'm doing a presentation, I do try to make it so that a specific question gets a specific answer. Mm-hmm. And also then I will connect it to a larger thing, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody's asking about supporting one particular child with one particular thing in the realm of sensitivities, for example, I'll answer that question as specifically as I can, and then also talk about sensitivities more generally so that people who are doing other things.
That's interesting with that format and that many people. Like, were there many questions to field, or how did that?
Yeah. I unfortunately was not able to get to everyone, and both sessions I ended up sticking around and spending an extra half an hour or so, and have well over 100 people each time sticking around that extra half hour, which I am told is the first time has happened. There's one thing I know how to do is keep people interested. Self-deprecating, I guess. But
how is that self-deprecating? That's an interesting aside.
I'm making it, as opposed to saying like I was trying to answer questions and there was value there for people who were sticking around, whatever. I'm saying it as like I keep people on the hook.
Oh, I was translating that as like, yes, you keep people interested. Like, that's a good thing.
Yeah. So no, unfortunately, I didn't get anywhere near to all the questions and comments, and there's just too many people.
Because I was thinking if I was a parent and I met you for the first time, I would ask you so many questions that would take up the whole session, and that's just one person.
Well, obviously I try to make sure I'm moving on to people and doing my best to answer questions and give people time to speak.
I'm wondering if we could follow up and offer parent coaching and see if anybody wants to work with you as a parent coach.
Well, I'm sure that people would, but I don't have availability for that. That's part of why I do.
Are you on any new clients?
Not right now. I'm full. But that's part of where the stream comes in. Mm-hmm. Part of the purpose of the stream is to say, yeah, I can't get to everybody's stuff, but I am available for an hour every week. And if you're not available at this time live, you can also send us questions or thoughts or whatever. We can answer it on the stream, and then you can watch it after the fact, kind of stuff. Because nice. I wish I had time to sit and talk to every single person, but I don't.
A new development with the stream for people listening is that we will now be archiving the stream not only on YouTube but also on Twitch.
A thing that I thought was already happening, but I was wrong about. So now it will be happening.
Yeah. And I also updated the schedule on Twitch so people can get notified that every week on Monday.
Oh.
Because there wasn't actually a notification that still said we had a group that you did like years ago.
Oh.
So
cool.
Yeah, so now people will be able to watch the stream on our website as well.
Fun. Making it more accessible. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Love accessibility.
Well, that's
why I'm
especially when it comes to the stream, that's a big part of what we're trying to do is make the barrier to entry as low as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason that I make sure that we stream on Twitch in particular is because there are, especially with the kinds of things we talk about, there are many younger people who are interested in these things and don't have an opportunity to get more direct support, or if they do, they have to go through their parents, and not every child is in a position where talking to their parents about it is viable. So trying to make it so that we are available to people who wouldn't have access to these kinds of supports otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally.
Anyway. Yeah, that's what it was about. What's on your mind? I'm guessing at this point that Maria is not going to be joining today.
Yeah, I don't think so. Creativity, making things, composing music, sending you something and not hearing back from you.
You sent me something?
This is helpful.
When did you send?
I did, so I sent I'm kind of saying this for the people listening, but we're trying to start a podcast that is the audio of the stream into a podcast. And so I have a friend who's a composer, and I was thinking about asking him to compose the intro, and then we have a coach who is a voiceover person, so she would do the intro. But instead of asking him, I was like, oh, could I compose something? And so I composed a really rough draft of an intro, and I was thinking about just keeping it to myself, but then I was like, no, I need to share it with Brandon and Marie, because this is what we're talking about, is sharing things that aren't done, sharing things that aren't perfect. And so I tried to send it in our messages, but it didn't work, so I sent it in an email to you and Marie yesterday.
Yeah, I don't check my emails on Sunday. And
sounds reasonable.
I mean, honestly, that's something I mentioned in talking about this putting stuff out there to people thing is that what makes it so difficult to put things out for to other people is how much you care about their response to it. And so, not that you shouldn't care, but you want to try and set it up so that the act of sharing it is the part that's important, and that if people read it or don't read it or listen or don't listen, if they get back to you or don't get back to you, and whatever they say, if and when they do, that's not as important, because otherwise people will. If you're expecting people to get back to you, sometimes they won't. Like people will give you different responses than what you're looking for, including no response at all.
Well, I think the projects in particular that cause me more distress are the ones that do require other people's input, like deciding on the intro to the podcast. Like, there's a lot of the other stuff I do that are just me, I just don't share and I enjoy.
Well, so I'm saying is you should share those other things. That's what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And the thing that will make it easier for you to share things is to be able to shift in a way where you're not as concerned about people's responses or lack thereof to those things. It's kind of like,
to be honest, I think the thing I'm most afraid of is if people say, oh, you should like really do this again.
Really do what again?
Music again.
Why are you afraid of it? Well, we're on stream. I don't want to.
I'm afraid of it for so many reasons.
Wouldn't you want people to want you to do music again?
I want them to want. No, I don't.
So you want people to not want you to do music again?
I think it would be like, oh, Caitlin's sort of doing this as a hobby right now, and it's fun to.
Oh, you mean like people saying you should do it as a profession again? Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Why would you care if other people think you should do it as a profession? That doesn't mean you.
Because I think I probably should.
Okay, and well, then it's not really about what other people think, is it?
And then it's people other than me saying it, which makes it harder because the voice in my head is already saying it so clearly.
I mean, that's always what. Okay, I was just having a conversation about this, but I think we've probably talked about it on stream at some point, that when somebody says something to you and it really bothers you, generally, I'm talking about like they say something about their perception of you or, the impact you're having or whatever. If it really bothers you, generally it's two things have to be true. It's something that you already were worried is true about you. And it's something that you really hate the idea that it might be true about you.
Correct.
Right? Like if someone's trying to make me feel bad about myself and accuses me of, I don't know, being too quiet, like that's not really going to bother me because it's not something I am worried is true about me. But if someone's going to say I talk too much, then, well, I'm worried that that's true and I would hate the idea, or that I'm arrogant. Like those are the things that get to you. So you're in some sense worried that it is true or believe it might be true that you should go into music as a profession. Why would you hate for that to be true? Why would you
prefer
it
means
not
I have
be true?
To do it.
Wait. You kind of think you should do it, and that means that you have to do it. What do you mean by should in this scenario?
Should would be some version of, oh, I'm enjoying that, or like, oh, that's nice, but I think you could benefit from having like an official collaborator or things like that.
Benefit in what way?
Well, for example, like access to a studio to record, or access to someone who is better at guitar or piano than I am to do stuff with, and access to someone who I could perform with. Like, I don't think I would perform any of this
Still don't understand
alone.
the have to part. Like, if you think that you should, what do you mean? Like, that you would enjoy it? Or,
I don't know if I would enjoy it.
well, then what do you mean by should in this case? Like, you would make a lot of money?
No, this is an
Should.
interesting question. I've had a lot of people say this to me when I was singing more often as a like early 20s. They'll just say, you should do something with that voice, or you should sing opera, or you should be a musician. And they've said explicitly to me before, like, you can't like waste a talent like that, or like things in that realm. Or some version of, if you're so good at this, why wouldn't you do it? You should do it.
You do it. You mean do it as your career?
I think they mean like, yeah. And in extreme cases, they were saying you should be famous, but in like more moderate cases, it was like, oh, you should perform, like other people should hear you.
Should is one of those words like need.
Yeah, it scares
That
me. It makes me feel like I'm
describes-
gonna die.
Describes the relationship between two things.
Mm-hmm.
So you should do it in order to what? And
Live my potential, or some people had said like make the world a better place, because it was like so healing to watch you perform that I know you could help other people by performing. It was just like
and I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what is the thing where it like could be true that you should? What would that mean that you then wouldn't? You would feel like you have to but don't want to. Like there's some elements of it that should and have to and want to are all the same.
So I should perform because it would be a good idea, and people had many different ideas about why it would be a good idea.
I should do a thing because it would be a good idea is recursive. If something's a good idea, then you should do it. They both describe the same thing. Somebody thinks it's a good idea.
I was going somewhere with that. I think people's main argument was like, you're so good at this that you need to do it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when people say like it's your genius or something, so like if someone was like, it's like if someone's really good at sewing and people are like, you should design, like you should become a designer, or like you should like
I think it was
apply to Parsons, or
Mitch Hedberg, but I can't remember. There's a comedian, an old stand-up, and I think it was Mitch Hedberg, who in his bit or in his work did a bit about how he tried writing a pilot because people will see comedian stand-ups and say like, you're hilarious, you should write a show.
Mm-hmm. And
his whole bit is like, that's like going to a great chef and being like, you are great at cooking, you should farm, right? Like
how is performing different than performing? Like these people were responding to me at a performance saying, you're so good at performing, you should perform more.
Right. So you already were performing.
Yeah.
So what were they saying you should do differently? Different kinds of performances?
No, like you should just continue. Like don't give this up. Keep doing it. It was so enjoyable for them.
And why would, but they're not talking about performing for them again.
It included them, but it also included like you should be famous, or
This is very interesting. And
It is.
I feel like we're getting into personal stuff on the stream. I don't know if, but
I'll tell you if I hit a limit.
when
Maybe I'll
someone's
ask you to
saying
delete
you
it.
should be famous, that specific phrase, if someone says you should be famous, they don't mean you should do famousness, you know, like that you should engage in the activity of being famous.
Mhm.
They're saying, I think you're really great at this, or I really enjoyed this, and I think that you deserve to be famous.
I think famous under that, guys, was like you can't be famous if you don't keep doing it. And so
That's reading between the lines. But also, let's say
no, sometimes I would ask them, or they'd say like a specific path, like, okay, well, in opera, which I don't want to do opera again, but in
those
opera,
people are assuming you wanted to be famous.
I don't think so.
You think people were coming up to you and saying you should do something that they don't assume you actually want?
Yeah, precisely.
This is interesting and helpful. And again, worried that it's like overly specific to you, but I was not there, and I can't. Like one
So
of the
is your
things
point
that
that you
people will
think-
make is that they're trying to encourage you.
Okay.
They're not telling you that they think you would be failing or doing a bad thing if you were to do something different. They're aware that many people want to be famous, and particularly in the realm of the arts, that there are far more people that want to be successful in it than actually end up successful in it. And they're just trying to compliment you. They're saying, I think you're so fantastic that you are going to be one of those people who is famous if you continue. It's just their way of saying, I think you're great. But you're interpreting it as they're putting pressure on you, and they'll be disappointed in you if you don't continue.
I mean, some people did communicate disappointment when I didn't continue opera.
Well, those people most likely were invested in your opera career in some way.
It included like random people. I mean, it depends on investment. What does investment mean?
That there's some impact on them personally.
It included just people from my hometown who would, and they still do, they still come up to me and they're like, you should be singing.
Yeah, those people are invested.
How are they invested?
Either they want
so
you
they
to
can
perform.
say they knew me or something?
Well, either they want you to perform so they can hear you again. Well,
Or keep going, sorry.
or yes, that like sometimes people get an idea about what they think would be beneficial or whatever, and then yes, they're disappointed if it's not. Like, I'm disappointed when the Bears lose a playoff game, or even more, just lose a game because they've only been to the playoffs a couple of times.
You like the Bears?
I do.
Okay.
That it's like a rooting interest. You know what I mean? Like they're invested.
So then
in the
should
sense of,
doesn't connect to an activity then? Sorry, a rooting
Yeah.
interest, they're invested in this.
This is why I'm asking you about should, because
This is really interesting.
in the many cases, especially with the kinds of things you're saying, like should does not mean if you don't do this thing, I'll think less of you, or you will have failed, or you've made a mistake if you don't do this thing. Like, imagine if you say to somebody like,
Would a mistake include like a regret? Because people have said like, don't you regret not continuing in opera?
again, that says more about
You should
what
be
they
famous.
think than about you. But think of the phrase like if someone says like, oh, I'm going to, like I'm from Salt Lake. If somebody says to me they're going to Salt Lake and I say something like, oh, you should really check out Nomad East. It's a great restaurant. It doesn't mean that like, I'm just suggesting something that I think that they will find interesting or enjoyable. Not like that if they don't do it, they've somehow made a grave error, or I'll be disappointed in them, or they made a mistake. Should doesn't always mean this is the best choice for you, and any other choice is a worse choice. It does sometimes mean that, but it doesn't always mean that.
I feel like one thing they were trying to communicate is like that they thought I was so good at this that I couldn't possibly be as good at that as other things, and so therefore if it's the thing that I'm best at, then I should continue in it.
Well, you mentioned earlier the phrase like this is your genius, and if somebody's phrasing it like that, whether or not they actually think that, then yes, they're communicating this is the specific thing that you are best suited for, in my opinion, and therefore anything else you would be less well suited to.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, nobody really means that.
Why? How?
How would they know what
That's
else
such an
you're good at or
autism
not
moment.
good at? Like how?
So are you saying it's still some version of a compliment?
Yes, it's just saying you're really good at this, or I really enjoyed your performance. I mean, the vast majority of the people, I'm assuming, who've said things like that to you, we're not going to be like following up to know what you did next or not.
Well, they did. They still do.
The vast majority of them?
A lot of them. It's really surprising.
A lot and the vast majority are different
What's
things.
the vast majority?
So you're saying that every person, or close to every person who said something like this to you, continues to follow up with you after the fact to see if you're still doing it or not?
To the best of my knowledge, yes. It makes me so uncomfortable.
While that is possible,
I guess I'm talking about the people that I know. Are you talking about random people who
Well, it
complimented
sounded like
me?
you were talking. You said random people would say things like
Oh,
this to you?
the people that I have some sort of personal relationship with, even if it's very distant, all of them have followed up with me.
Well, right. But again, by definition, having a personal relationship with someone, what you mean is someone who was going to remain in contact with you and or follow up with you, because that's the nature of having a personal relationship. Like anyone that you had no expectation of hearing from
But there's
ever
so many
again,
other things they could have talked to you about.
and they probably did. They probably talked to you about more than just.
No, it's actually, it's still a conversation starter for like small talk all the time.
Sure.
And if it's small talk, usually
In the
that
same
doesn't
way that
exist for
when-
more than 5 to 10 minutes.
In the same way that when many people will see children that they know, they'll start with, how's school? Because it's a thing that they know to say.
It includes people who know that I'm a therapist now. They still bring it up.
What is the assertion that you're trying to make here to me?
That I have been implicitly pressured by many people in my life to be a singer, and that although part of what they were saying was a compliment, it was also pressure.
What do you mean by pressure?
That I should do it.
Well, that's recursive again.
That I am failing them if I don't do it.
They give you that impression?
Some of them did.
Well, the ones that did, if they were intending to, because we could read that impression off of somebody even when that's not their intention.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're reading that intention off of somebody and it's accurate, they're actually
We have a.
feel like you're failing them. Hello. Just responding, yes, we see your comment. If there's more you would like to say. If someone said to you that you're a great singer and therefore you should continue to do it and should become famous, and then are disappointed in you for not becoming famous, like the more disappointed they are in you for that, the less their opinion should matter.
Why? I know it seems obvious. I'm just trying to track what you're saying.
Yes, this is open for questions. We're just chatting about whatever we're chatting about until we get questions and comments. Because, how to put it? To make a suggestion that is potentially helpful, right? To say like, oh, I think you would benefit from or enjoy or do well with this thing
Mm-hmm.
is great. But then to come back and say, in some way you are a bad person or doing bad things or making bad choices for not doing what I said you should do is narrow-minded, controlling. It shows that their focus is on their own thoughts and not on you. And therefore,
So it
I wouldn't
essentially
care so
means
much.
like at some point in your life we agreed, and now that we don't agree, my opinion still matters more.
You're saying your opinion about you and what you should do matters more than this person who is.
No. That's what they're thinking. That their opinion matters more.
If someone is treating you as though you've done
Interesting.
something wrong for not doing what they said you should do, especially someone that's not very closely connected to your life, or that you have intermittent contact with or whatever, then like, why would their opinion matter that much to you? You're the same way that you sent those two messages, hi, and is this open for questions, same way you can put in a question. And
we are so happy to answer them.
Really, we said at the beginning, we prefer, like we just
prefer,
make guesses
yeah.
about what people might be interested in until we know, but as soon as we know with someone, that we would prefer to talk about that. So don't worry about keeping on the topic that we're on or anything like that.
No, you can ask any question.
Just more generally, the more that someone makes you feel bad in some way, the less their opinion about you matters.
Yeah, I was listening to, this is gonna sound like super pop psychology, but I was listening to an interview on a podcast with a woman who claims to specialize in narcissistic personality disorder. But it was funny, within 5 minutes of it, she said, I think we should throw out the DSM, like these diagnoses. I think they're more harmful than they are helpful, and often they're not useful, and like blah, blah, blah. But she's like, I just say narcissism because it's like a thing. But anyway, she was saying that she thinks, and I don't agree with her necessarily. Well, I'm kind of worried about saying it now.
What did she say?
She was saying that people who are empathic and easily make excuses for people that they don't enjoy being around, and sometimes it gets to a point where the other people are harming them, that they can be more susceptible to being in dysfunctional relationships with narcissistic people because their like baseline assumption is that relationships should be hard. Like, oh, you're just having a hard. She was like, she's also a therapist. She was like, I've had clients say things like, oh, it was a hard week, and it was another hard week, and it was another hard week, and she was saying, well, what about having good times? And so when you were saying, like, in general, trying to be around people that make you feel good,
Well, that's not what I said, but I do believe that.
Yeah.
That
What
being
did you say,
happier.
Brandon Tosters?
I said that the more that someone makes you feel bad about yourself, the less their opinion about you matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure to also say that I know this is going to sound like a contradiction, but also the people about, like, the people whose opinions of me matter to me the most are also the people who have caused me to feel the worst about myself. Because it's every time someone makes you feel bad about yourself, how much you care about their opinion theoretically would be less. And every time someone makes you feel better about yourself, their opinion of you would matter to you more.
Yeah,
and
I think
my wife, who makes me feel the best about myself way more than any other person over the course of my life, has also made me feel like in sheer like volume has made me feel worse about myself than other people, because anyone else who came anywhere close, I just didn't continue to interact with. She makes me feel much better about myself than worse.
I think what this person was saying is being in long-term relationships with people that in general make you, like, it's a net negative. And you're saying yours is a net positive, but sometimes it's negative. And
Yeah,
this is
if a relationship,
that's a net negative.
If a relationship or an experience makes you feel worse about yourself more than it makes you feel better about yourself, more frequently, more intensely, like, in sum total, whatever, then engaging in that is a cost you're paying. And there should be some value that comes out of it, right? Like, there are things that we all do that are more unenjoyable than they are enjoyable. And we do them because that's the cost we're paying in order to get the value of something else. Like, most people, I would say, I feel fairly confident in saying that most people, their jobs are things that, even though they sometimes enjoy whatever, but like on balance, probably less of it, like it's a net not enjoyable. Like they wouldn't do it for free, but you still do it because you get paid for it, right? Like, same with relationships, that there are relationships where the experience of that relationship is a net negative. It makes you feel worse than it makes you feel better, more worse than it makes you feel better. And yet there's some other value to the relationship. And value doesn't always mean something you like or enjoy. Anyway, that statement you made about what that woman said, at least the first part of it, take out empathic and narcissistic, and it's just an inarguable logical statement that people who are more willing to like interact with people who make them feel bad are going to be in relationships that make them feel bad for longer. Like, by definition, they're more willing. That means they stick longer. It's just two different ways of describing the same thing. But I think when we start assigning traits to people as though the trait is the reason, like that someone is empathic, that's why. But if someone didn't behave that way, then we wouldn't call them empathic, right? Like, we assign the labels.
No, I agree. I do
based
that.
on the patterns.
I do that with my clients too, is explore what's actually happening observably instead of like using a bunch of buzzwords and then getting kind of lost in it all.
I'm like on the edge of my seat because I was expecting a question after being asked if it's open for questions, and I don't know if there is one coming or not. It's totally fair to just ask if it's open for questions without having a question to ask, but I'm like waiting for it to come now. It's not a bad thing if it doesn't, just I'm checking it. Yeah, it is interesting to be asked these questions. Like I said, I like being asked questions that seem like the answer is self-evident because it's useful to be prompted to put things
Well, I
into
would be
language.
curious what you mean by willing in that circumstance, because I could imagine some people getting defensive of the word willing in that context.
Well, I was using her language. Isn't that what she said?
I don't think she said.
Say again what she said.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, okay.
I thought you had said that she said empathic people are more willing to tolerate.
Yeah, when you
like making excuses for people, I think is still are more likely to make excuses for
when
people.
You said willing in the context that you are more likely to agree with when you removed anxiety or empath and narcissist. I thought you were saying in that statement that you do agree with that it's an inarguable thing. That people who are more willing to tolerate to interact with people who make them feel bad, they will then continue to interact or be more likely to interact with people.
I do think that because that's what that would mean by definition.
Yeah, but if that's something that you believe, then in that context, what do you personally mean by willing?
So it's like this other language we're talking about. It's language that we utilize to describe a pattern of behavior that we're seeing, right? So all we're saying is that if you notice that somebody is staying in a relationship with people who are treating them poorly, then by definition, you could say they are willing to tolerate that to the extent that they're tolerating it. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean they want it or are okay with it or aren't bothered by it or anything like that. It just means if they weren't willing to tolerate it for that long, they would have left. Feeling supremely anxious. Aww. That's totally fair. And that's why I was trying to say, oh no, having an anxiety attack. That's what I was trying to say there at the end of that doesn't need to be a question. It's not an attempt to pressure you into, I was just describing my state. So please don't worry about having to put it out there. I'm sorry that you're having an anxiety attack. I would like to be helpful. We both would like to be helpful. However much we can do that through a live stream, I don't know. But rest assured that I am happy to have had the comments, even just the hi. You could have left it at the hi, and I would still be happy to have had that comment without any other follow-up. There's nothing that either of us are, that's interesting, I was going to say expecting from you, but I did say I was expecting a question. I meant expecting in the sense of, like, you know, when somebody says A, B, C, you would expect the next thing to be D. Not as in, if it isn't that thing, someone or something has let you down or done something wrong, which is part of what we were talking about earlier. Sometimes what people were saying is just, I expect, based on my assessment, that if you were to continue, you would end up being famous. I'm not saying that, therefore, you are not allowed to choose something different. I'm tempted to give generic advice about anxiety attacks, but I feel like that's probably unnecessary. You know, like saying things like grounding exercises or breathing exercises. Yeah,
I'm wanting to say things like, we're happy to have you here, but I don't know if that's...
Well, we are.
Yeah.
And I am sorry that that's how you're feeling. It sucks. I guess I think generally that people know the generic stuff. And that's not always the case, but, you know, take deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. That's not helpful for everyone. That's not helpful. Even when it's helpful for a person, it's not helpful every time. That everything is specific and unique. And I hesitate to be patronizing and generalizing about giving advice, especially when it hasn't been explicitly asked for.
Yeah.
But I don't like it that you're having an experience that you don't like. sucks. And I'm drawing conclusion, or I'm making connections that you aren't stating or haven't stated, which again is
I'm
not
making connections.
not pressure to not me saying that you should state more, but because I don't know if that's something you were experiencing before you came and made a comment, or something that started to happen after you commented. If it's the latter, then it likely has to do with some of the things we've been talking about being visible. Right? People.
It's so hard for me to be visible. Oh
And,
my gosh.
and people should only do it to the extent that they are comfortable doing it. I'll also say, if it has anything to do with that, you are more than welcome to email us a question after the fact, or at any point. We wouldn't see it right now, but you can go to our website, effectiveartistry.com, and there's a way to be able to contact us, and you could email us a question, and then we can address it on the stream next week. And even if you're not able to be present next week, you could watch next week's stream after the fact, right? They stay on YouTube, as you can see. There's all the previous ones. So if that's at all related to what you're feeling, if you would like to ask a question, but you don't want to ask it right now or visibly in the comments, then that's an option. It's hard. I think there are some things. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, especially with only 10 minutes or so left today. But there are ways of thinking about cognition and whatever that have a lot to do with something I'll challenge people on sometimes, to point out that everything we think and everything we feel is shaped and influenced by other people. Sometimes I'll say to someone, go ahead and think something right now, anything at all. Only rule is you're not allowed to use any language or symbols that somebody else developed. Just to make the point that even our thoughts happen in language that we learned from other people. And so when you're talking about some things, especially some of the stuff we're talking about, when we're talking about being a good person or being a good performer or being empathic or narcissistic, a lot of these things, what they are about is how people perceive you. Like being cool is about whether or not other people perceive you as being cool. Being attractive is about being funny, being a good person. These are all things that at their core, if you're going to try to evaluate whether it's true of you, what you're really thinking is, would other people think of me that way? And hopefully, theoretically, like something we're all attempting to do is to be somewhat judicious in like which people we think of. Like when you think about, am I being a good person? That's often going to take the form of like, what would my grandmother think about what I'm doing right now? Or sometimes people that you don't know but have a mental model of, literally what would Jesus do is a version of that. So there's a way of talking about these things that in essence, it's kind of like we're all carrying around a bunch of people in our heads that are observing us all the time.
Yeah.
Obviously not literally, but whether we think something is appropriate has been shaped by our beliefs, our understandings, the communication we receive from other people about what people generally think is appropriate.
Yeah.
And I'm using that word because that one in particular, no one can debate that. What appropriate means is what people generally would think is appropriate.
Yeah, you can't just like on an island determine.
Right.
Yeah.
There's interesting etymology for that word, actually. And so I find sometimes, especially that I'm going to say neurodivergent people who identify as neurodivergent, but really people generally who are more aware of, I see your comment. Let me finish this statement and then I'll read it and we'll do what we can in the time we have. the people who are generally more aware of their own subjective internal experience, their thoughts and their feelings, which often happens because those experiences are negative and they draw your attention. But people who are more aware of that tend to also be people that, when they have any reason to believe that that feeling of being observed and judged is no longer just about their ideas of what people would think, but that there are actual people observing them, right? Like, tend to have a stronger reaction. The people who are otherwise anxious are much more likely to have stage fright than someone who is not otherwise anxious.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you being here and putting out comments, including this most recent one. And we'll look at it. I'm having swells of anxiety these days. I'm unfocused, not focusing that much on work, making mistakes sometimes, and getting more anxious. Yeah, again, a crappy experience. And the worst version of really any like negative emotional experience, and by negative I mean unpleasant, which anxiety is definitely one. It's not pleasant to feel anxiety. The worst version of any of those things is when you feel that way about feeling that way. So in this case, when you feel anxious about the fact that you are anxious, that's the worst version of anxiety. Because being anxious about anything else, there's a cap on it, right? A thing is happening or might happen or whatever, and you're anxious about it. And there's only so much, no matter, it can get real bad and it can be disproportionate, right? You're getting anxious about something that everyone else would say doesn't matter. But it's a thing that is finite. Yeah, you don't want to seem messy and create a bad impression. I'm gonna run a little bit late on the stream to try and do what I can here. Just setting you up for that because I know sometimes it matters to you to know time. Yeah. Getting anxious about being anxious. The problem is, if what's causing your anxiety is your own anxiety, then being anxious, you get anxious about that, which means that you're more anxious than you were previously, which means that your anxiety about your anxiety is more because your anxiety is more, which then, does that make sense? It's like, here's how anxious I am. Here's how anxious I am about it. That gets added to this. And now it's this, which means I'm now this anxious about it, which gets added to that. And it grows exponentially. This, what you're talking about, and I don't know if this particular language is relevant to you or not, but this is a very common thing for people who either are diagnosed or identify as having ADHD, being very worried about appearing to other people as though they are unfocused, as though they are disorganized, messy. One of our coaches, well, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but Sarah, one of our coaches, Sarah, is an actor and was diagnosed with ADHD at a very young age. I'm not saying anything that she hasn't said on like her own podcast.
She also has it on her biography on the website.
Yeah. And would worry a lot about people reading her as having spaced out or been unfocused. In fact, a specifically common like behavior attached to this is people who, when they're making eye contact with somebody, it starts to like feel overwhelming or uncomfortable or anxiety inducing and whatever, but they don't look away because they have a concern, which is well-founded in many cases, that if they don't make eye contact, the other person will think they're not listening or that they don't care about listening. So they continue to make eye contact, which makes them more uncomfortable, more anxious, more overwhelmed, which actually makes it so that they can't listen so well. And now they're stuck, right? Like, I'm either having trouble sleeping, even if you sleep, you wake up with a start. In that case, I'm either I have to take the risk of appearing as though I am not listening or I don't care or I'm not interested by looking away, or I have to try to appear as though I'm interested without actually listening, which kind of circuitously means I'm not as interested in listening as I am in appearing as I am. You can get stuck in these loops, right? There are situations in which all the possibilities are, none of them are ones that solve the problem or are perfect, or at least none of the ones that you're aware of for sure. I'll say this, anxiety in particular, among all these different emotions, has physical components to it. And so it's worth, how do I want to say this? Emotion generally has physical sensation attached to it as well as a cognitive aspect, right? That if I'm nauseous, but I'm not having any thoughts that are related to any idea of nerves or anxiety or whatever, then I will just say I'm nauseous. But if I'm nauseous and I'm very nervous about what I'm about to do, going out on stage in front of people or whatever, then I'll say, well, that's anxiety or nerves or butterflies or whatever. So there's a physical sensation component. And I'm trying to be careful about, I don't want to give the impression that if there is, I don't want to make it sound like that means there's a medical condition that needs to be addressed, right? That there's some kind of illness or injury or whatever. Although that can happen, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say that there's a physical element to it. That take anybody and don't let them sleep well, make them wake up with a start every so often through the night. And the next day, whatever things, irritability or anger or difficulty focusing or anxiety, like whatever those things are that are unpleasant and that person is prone to, is going to happen more. So a lot of the things I was referencing kind of very briefly and quickly earlier about, whether it's grounding exercises or whatever, many of those things are based around the idea of bringing some attention, some awareness to your physical state, to your body. That it can be worth looking at your pattern of eating, for example. When are you eating or what are you eating and when not? Mm-hmm. Especially the way you're phrasing, I'm having swells of anxiety these days, to me implies that this is a change. That at some, whatever you're referring to as these days, your swells of anxiety either appeared when they weren't previously present or worsened in some way, frequency, intensity, something like that. And so something that's worth looking at is what other things may have changed around the time that changed for you, right? That especially in particular things that you might not think of as being relevant, mm-hmm. because those are the stuff that get us stuck the most. Like the things we easily can identify as like, well, that would make somebody anxious. If that was happening, you probably would have noticed it already. Where there are other things where you'd say, where like, for example, weather changes that most people wouldn't associate with anxiety. And so when you say what happened around the same time you started getting more anxious, they would never think to say the weather changed. Although that's a particular like actual one that does correlate. So it's worth looking at that side of things. Again, I'm making a lot of assumptions because I don't want to ask too much of you to give more individual or specific answers. And please feel free to like email with more. Because that's what we would do, right? Is find out more and more and more specifically about individually what's happening with you. And I don't want you to be in a position to feel like you should be answering that or that somebody wants you to right now. As a general, when people are struggling with something that they identify as a cognitive or psychological issue, you're going to get your biggest return on investment, your most bang for your buck by focusing in on physical things, because those are the things which have been overlooked the most. Vice versa is also true. When somebody is struggling with something that they've primarily identified as a physical thing, there's the most value in exploring the cognitive or psychological side of those things, because that's what's been overlooked the most. Because you're calling it anxiety and talking about the difficulty sleeping after talking about the anxiety, I'm just trying to be transparent about the language I'm looking at that's leading me to draw conclusions, not as though they're accurate, but as that it's most useful to talk about it in this way, because given what I'm seeing, that seems more likely than the alternatives. The sequencing there implies that you're thinking of the trouble sleeping as being a result of the anxiety. And maybe you don't. But it's just as possible that the anxiety is a result of the trouble sleeping. Or really, honestly, the two things just go together, and it's not necessarily a cause and effect thing that one's causing the other or not. I can say from my life specifically, it took me a long time to realize this about myself. This is a very recent thing, that when I get really tired, I'm talking about like, you know, bone tired, which I honestly don't think it's something I experienced until I became a parent, which doesn't mean that people don't experience it without being parent. It's just my experience of it. That one of the things that'll happen is I get really bad health anxiety, that I'll notice a sensation in my body and I'll start to think, is this a sign of something? Is there something going on with my liver or whatever? And start to worry about being ill in some kind of long-term way. And I've had enough experience with this over the past few years for myself to know that it correlates directly with being tired. And so I know, and it happened to me yesterday for the first time in a while, I know that when I feel that, when I start to get that health anxiety, I know that it also must mean that I'm very tired. But that doesn't mean that I can then say, well, then there's nothing to be anxious about. Because just because health anxiety correlates with tiredness to me doesn't mean that I might not have some health problem going on, right? But it's still useful to know, because if I recognize that, not to say that that means that there is nothing and I shouldn't be concerned, because if I say that, then I'll get anxious about being anxious, right? Like I shouldn't be thinking this. No, there could be something there. And also, I wasn't worried about it yesterday when I wasn't as tired, or and then I prioritize the things that I can prioritize to try and be less tired, and then the next day I'm not worried about it as much or at all. Again, part of what causes that health anxiety for me when it's happening is the thought that, well, maybe just when I'm more rested, I just ignore something that's really there. And I can't make statements about that. I can just say that I've checked out I very much am a believer, if you're anxious about a thing and there's something you can do that will remove that anxiety, like if you're anxious that somebody hates you and you have the opportunity and feel safe in being able to just ask them and have them say no, then do it. If it's something you can do that's low cost and safe, So sometimes when I'm dealing with a lot of health anxiety, I'll just talk to my doctor, set an appointment, get blood work done. And every time I've done that, everything's come back looking clean. And it doesn't mean that there won't be some time in the future where it goes differently. But whatever it is that you have an impulse to do, some of those things, there are reasons you're not doing it. It's particularly costly or risky. But if there's any extent to which you're thinking, you have an impulse to do a thing and you're thinking, I shouldn't have to do it, right? Like I should just be able to stop being anxious in some other way. I don't find that generally to be a valid reason not to do something.
Brandon, I had a meeting at 2, so I'm going to jump off, and I want you to have all of the time you want to spend.
Yeah,
so,
good to be with you.
Yeah, I'll see you later.
I'll see you later. Thank you. I don't want to take this on and on forever, in part because I don't want you to feel pressured to have to say more or feel bad about taking my time, because please don't. That will happen with people. Where I was talking earlier about these presentations I did last week where I stayed a half an hour after each time. I am in charge of. There's nothing you or anybody else could do to make me stay here if I didn't want to be. So just trying to head off anything like that. But I am going to try not to take too much time on this. When you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling any kind of unpleasant experience in an intense way, in a way that's interfering with your life, the first most important thing is to do things that help you to cope. Cope meaning make it so that it's not as bad, right? That when you're having an anxiety attack, what we eventually want to look at is what are the things that are happening that are making you anxious or causing you to get into these anxiety attacks, and how do we change things to make it so that it happens less frequently or doesn't happen at all or whatever. But when it's happening, it's not time to worry about that stuff. When it's happening, it's time to just focus on whatever needs to happen to get you grounded again. regulated again, whatever word you want to use. Preventing these experiences is better than coping with them, certainly. But when they're happening, preventing them is not an option. It's happening. So we cope first. So you want to focus on what are the things that help so that when you're having an anxiety attack, you're able to get out of it more quickly, that it's less intense while it is happening, that it has less of a negative impact on you, right? That even if I have an anxiety attack that's just as intense and lasts just as long, that's a bigger problem when I am at work and need to give a presentation in front of my boss than when I'm at home with my family, or, hanging out and going for a walk in the woods or whatever. So we're focused on things that make it so that you're able to get out of it more quickly. It's less intense, and that it has a less negative impact on your life. And I do find, again, being general here, I do find that mindfulness exercises, especially things which draw your attention away from the anxiety, right? That if I say in this moment something like, find 5 things that are red that you can see, that draws your attention to the physical environment, which takes attention away from what's happening internally. If you are somebody who has identified certain particular, you might use the language stims. If that's the case, engaging in those is helpful. You might not use the language stim, but still have an idea of these are the things. Like long ago, I knew about myself that if I am in my head in some significant negative way, I want to change things, that if I watch an engaging movie or played an engaging video game or read an engaging book, that those 3 things would pull me out of my head. And those aren't always options, but it's good, if you have some kind of awareness of what are the things that help you get out of your head. Sometimes it's creating art, sometimes it's talking to people or a specific person or certain specific people, going for a walk, baking, cleaning, anything you have a list of, these are the things that help me when I'm feeling anxious, to engage in those things if you are able to. The reason that mindfulness activities and breathing exercises, those kinds of things are so commonly suggested is because they're things that you always have access to, right? Like if it turns out that if you are someone that baking helps you to calm down when you are feeling dysregulated, that's great, but you can't always bake. Where breathing is something you can always do. You are always doing it. You can do it without anyone noticing. So that's why people tend to go to that when we're talking in a more generic way. It's stuff that people are most likely to be able to do. I will very briefly walk us through what I find to be a helpful coping exercise, a regulating exercise. And then, barring any further comments, we'll wrap up and we can circle back to this. And I do invite you or anybody else to send an email after the fact that we can take a look at and respond to. But one that I like, I just realized I have to use different language about this because I call it color breathing, but there is an actual exercise called color breathing that I don't actually know what it is. I just was told at some point that color breathing was a thing that people do, and then just kind of in my head filled out what I think that must be. And so I do this thing that I call color breathing, but honestly is probably not what people generally call color breathing. But I'll do my best to walk us through it in case that is helpful. Close your eyes. Find yourself in a comfortable, restful position physically to the best of your ability to do in whatever the circumstance is that you're in. And you're going to breathe while I'm talking. You're going to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth for the duration of this exercise. Every inhale is through your nose. Every exhale is through your mouth. And I want you to visualize, in this case, the anxiety. But whatever it is that you're feeling that you don't want to be feeling, that's unpleasant for you, I want you to visualize it, assign it a color and a size and a shape, and locate it in your body. Sometimes people will see it as like a brash red, spiky, almost like an urchin attached to the inside of their rib cage. Sometimes there are things you're feeling that's like a dark green sludge. Sometimes it's a black void. Sometimes, whatever it is, I want you to assign a visual image to that and visualize that being inside of you. Usually, especially with anxiety, we feel that somewhere in our chest or our sternum, somewhere in our abdomen. So keep breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And then you visualize on the inhale, the air that's coming in through your nose. You visualize that as being the complementary color to whatever it is on the inside. If the anxiety is red, then the air you're inhaling is green. If the anxiety is yellow, the air you're inhaling is purple. Right? Kind of think of a color wheel. And what happens every time you inhale is you visualize that coming in through your nose and down your throat and into your lungs, is that color passes by the anxiety. And that as it passes by, it's like erosion. A little tiny chunk of that anxiety breaks off of the mass that's in there and falls and mixes in with the air in your lungs. And it all combines together, and now it's a brown or a black, right? All that stuff mixed together, and you exhale it out through your mouth, and that little chunk that came off in that particular breath is gone with it. And you inhale again. It's green, and it passes by that red spiky mass of anxiety, and a little bit of it falls off, dissipates and mixes with the green air in your lungs, is exhaled as a dark brown. And each breath does that. Every inhale. Sometimes you're going to inhale, and as you're visualizing it, nothing came off on that one. No bit of it, not even a tiny little flake. Sometimes, as you're visualizing it, as the inhale passes by, it's a big chunk, takes off a particular portion that's been weakened. And eventually, if you're able to take the time, have the space for this, eventually there will be a final breath where whatever is remaining is finally dislodged and falls in and mixes and is exhaled. Sometimes you only need to wear it down a little bit and it loosens up, and then the whole thing comes free. Sometimes you wear it down bit by bit by bit, and even the last one is just that same tiny little bit. But sooner or later, eventually, you'll have worn it all down. It will all have eroded and detached from you on the inside, mixed with your breath, and be exhaled. And when that happens, you just slowly and comfortably in your own time open your eyes and pay attention to the environment around you and your body, and re-engage with whatever it is that you were doing before. Hopefully that's helpful. It very well may not be. Even if it is helpful for you, it might not be helpful for you in a different circumstance. Maybe it's helpful in part because I'm talking you through it, and it doesn't work as well without me talking you through it. Maybe it would work better for you without me talking you through it. I don't know. I appreciate all of you being here, but in particular, you in the comments. I appreciate you engaging and sharing with me. I would like to talk about this more if it's something you're interested in talking about more, answer more questions, be more helpful. And again, I'll remind you that emailing is an option, and I'll keep an eye out. And if I see something, I'll make sure to address it next week in the stream. But also you're welcome to show up again in the future. There certainly could be many things worth exploring about what is causing these swells of anxiety, why you're feeling this way, many things to potentially explore about what could be done to make it so that when it happens, you get out of it more quickly, or that it's not as intense, or it doesn't impact you as negatively, and many things to explore, not in the moment that it's happening, but when it's not happening. There are many things to explore that might be able to be done by you or others or in the environment that will make it so that it happens less frequently, because that's what we're aiming for. I tell people, I can't promise you that I know how to change whatever you're trying to change. I can't promise you that I will give you an idea and that you'll do it and it will work. I can't even promise you that if we keep trying, we'll eventually get to something that will work. Even when we do get to things that work, things don't work all the time, or in every context. Things will work one day and not the next. What I can promise you is there are other things to try. There are always, always other things to try, new things to explore and consider, new ideas to implement. And you just keep trying until something works. If you try something and it doesn't work, find something new to try. Very, very rarely is trying something that didn't work before going to work better for you because you're trying it again or trying it harder. And that oftentimes will be how things persist, right? Something that happens that you don't like and you're trying to address, but it continues. A lot of the time is because you've identified what you think of as the thing that could be done to solve the problem, and you do it and it doesn't solve the problem, or you can't do it, can't get yourself to do it, can't remember, whatever. So the problem persists. Generally, I would say, if it doesn't work and you're not doing it, not being able to get yourself to do it, forgetting, those are versions of it didn't work. Doesn't matter what version of it didn't work. If it doesn't work, try to see if you can come up with something new, especially get help, not in a sense of like go to therapy, although obviously I think that going to therapy can be useful for people. I just mean talking out loud. One of my rules people will hear me say around the office a lot is don't try to fight your thoughts on their home turf. You're going to have a bad time generally if you're trying to counteract your thoughts with your own thoughts. It's a lot easier if you put them into words, put it out there, and then they can be addressed that way. And I'm never making an assumption about what opportunities people have to do that or not. I know that it's not always an option. But, to the extent that it is, it'll be better. Including even putting these things out here right now. Anyway, I hope some of the things that we've talked about have been helpful to you and to everyone who's watching this now or in the future. As I said, anyone can go to the website, effectiveartistry.com, and contact us there and tell us about things that they'd like for us to discuss on the stream. Of course, you're always welcome to come back again next Monday and the Monday after. We're here almost every Monday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. And we'll keep doing what we can do. I appreciate you all. Thank you. And until next week.